It's usually. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today is the Chief Science Officer for the film The Game Changers. His name is David Goldman. He's a registered dietitian who I met many years ago when he was working at the True North Health Center. Please welcome him to the show. It's so nice to see you again.
It's wonderful to see you, AJ. Thanks for having me on.
I know, I miss you at True North.
I miss you too. I miss you too.
It was so fun when you were there. I loved your lectures because you always inject so much humor in them.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. That was one of the coolest things about True North is Alan he really, he lets you be you. And as long as you're providing, intelligent, accurate information, you get to sort of shine through. And I absolutely love that. And people are so dynamic there, right? The patients who would come in would ask fantastic questions. And I love when it can just be an easy back and forth rather than like, here's your lecture and then save your questions. Like, no, it was cool. They could just interrupt and I loved it there.
Well, it was so great because you mix science and humor and you're also like a personal trainer because I remember my husband and I had sessions with you and you really helped his back. So you not only can tell people what to eat, but you can tell them how to move. I mean, that's a great combination.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, first of all, I think it's weird for me to disconnect those two given how tethered they are, right? Like, think about how many clients or patients would come up and say, hey, I want to lean out, or I want to get a flat belly, or I want to be strong. Like all of it sort of comes together, whether it's for life extension or for athletic performance. The two are wedded, but the way that it was my favorite way I've ever been compensated for the work that I do was the way that you did it, where you baked, was it 1 or 2 amazing pecan pies as payment? Oh my God.
I love to pay people in dessert.
Oh, it was amazing. I would not see another dime in my whole life if I could get pecan pies for.
If only, my other doctors or dentists would take that as payment. That would be great. I remember that. That's hilarious. So I know what an RD is. You have 6 letters by your name. An RD, registered dietitian. Most people know that. But CSSD, those are new letters to me.
So that stands for Certified Specialist in Sports Dietetics. And if you work with a bunch of athletes, and I do, and you sort of document that and then take an exam, you can, if you pass it, you become a CSSD. And this is a credential that is desirable for anyone who wants to work in athletics, whether it's high school or especially collegiate and professional, certainly Olympic level athletes. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's there are a bunch of people who have it, but not as many as you think. So it's a great credential.
What kind of athletes do you work with, and what kind of sports are they in?
So I work with NCAA Division I. I work with professional athletes, and I also work at the Olympic level and in sports from so pro football, pro baseball, pro hockey. We think MMA for sure. So the fighters, runners, triathletes, a lot of triathletes. I think bodybuilders for sure, strongmen. I think that mostly covers it. I have worked in the past with fencers and archery and volleyball and soccer. I still work with soccer. Anyway, a whole bunch of different sports.
What do you do with them? Are you trying to optimize their diet?
Yeah, so one of 2 things. Either we'll just work straightforward with diet, where they already have a strength and conditioning coach who's programming their training. And so I'll just coordinate with them and sort of sync up so that their diet is appropriate for their sport. And that can deal with performance directly. It can be with body composition, which then also funnels into performance. So I'll either do that, or I'll actually write out the training programs and sort of, oversee both aspects of their training. And thank goodness for Zoom, because it makes it possible to work with people, all over the world. I should get sponsored by Zoom can Zoom pay me for something? Anyway, yeah. it's really fun, and they're a really, really diverse, dynamic group of people from all over the world. I mean, uh, multiple continents. So I feel very fortunate to have that kind of work to do.
I don't know if you're familiar with this book. It recently became a New York Times bestseller, The Plant-Based Athlete. And I'm wondering if you feel it's possible for a 100% plant exclusive diet to fuel an athlete, even on the Olympic level.
Oh my goodness, yes. I am familiar with the book. That's Robert Cheek and Matt Fraser, right? From No Meat Athlete. Yeah, so I'm definitely familiar with the book. And yeah, it's incredible to me that the myth persists that in order to be a competitive athlete, and everything beneath it in terms of athleticism, because right, if you can compete at that level, it's implied that everything less competitive is possible too. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that a lot of people still think that it's not possible to do that. I mean, it's just we see it anecdotally. It's demonstrated in the scientific literature that performance. None of that needs to take any hit at all. If anything, we just see improvements and in health. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of plant-based diets for athletes. I think it lends itself beautifully to sport, for sure.
Where did this idea that people in general and athletes in particular need more protein? I think back to the Olympic Games. Dr. McDougall once gave a talk that gladiators they were called barley men because they subsisted mostly on barley. So where did all these protein shakes and protein powders and drinking raw eggs? Who started that?
So, my friend AJ, in the beginning of the Game Changers film, we talked about was it Justus von Liebig? He was like I think a chemist or a doctor. I don't know. He just published some research, and he was really sure that protein was what was the source of energy. And so he pushed that concept hard, and it seems to have caught on. I'd be willing to bet that there's probably some industry influence in there too that's pushing that narrative. But it's really ironic because protein's not a particularly great source of fuel, right? So, people, it's hard to eat enough to perform athletically if you're just dumping huge amounts of protein into your diet, because like you think of an Atkins diet, it's sort of a negative feedback loop. You become too full, and I can talk with you about some of the studies on that, but just that it's not really great fuel for exercise. It is incredibly useful for recovery, but the amount of recovery that you need, you can easily get that quantity of protein eating plant-based, for sure. And if you want, I'm happy to talk sort of what that landscape looks like. How much do you need? Are we getting enough? And we could talk about that for sedentary folks, for runners and cyclists, for bodybuilders, all that stuff. I think all that stuff is fascinating, and I'm happy to chat
I would
about
love to, because we're actually calling this interaction, where do you get your protein on a plant-based diet? Because I've been plant-based for 44 years. And if I had a nickel for every time somebody said, where do you get your protein? I would be the richest person in the world, because, like, nobody asked that to the elephant. I mean, their elephants are vegan, right? It's probably the time I checked, and they get pretty large. And, also, David, when you think about it, breast milk has less than 10% of their calories from protein. And you would think if protein is so essential to growth, the breast milk would be more protein, because isn't that when a human needs the most growth, is when they're little babies?
Yeah, I'm with you. Preaching to the choir, my friend. But I agree. I think I might pick an elephant's a good one, but if you were to say to people, you say to like a 25-year-old guy, hey, do you want to look like an elephant? Because you can. Can we go with like silverback gorilla, or I don't know. I feel like elephant.
Well, it's just that they're pretty big, and they and they eat plants, and that's what I don't understand.
Sure. And I wouldn't want to get in a fight with an elephant. I feel like the elephant would probably crush me literally and figuratively instantly. So yeah, elephant's a good one. I'm just giving you a hard time.
Yeah, and it's funny because all the animals that people eat are the herbivores. The carnivorous animals, they're small. They're not very big.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. And yeah, I'm completely with you. These are incredibly strong, large animals. And yeah, they subsist on plants. So yeah, it's a good call. So let me ask you, when people say to you, Where do you get your protein? How do you know if you're getting enough? What's your response?
It depends on my mood. Sometimes if they ask it in a hostile way, I'll say something like from eating people like you. But if they're asking it genuinely, I just I refer them to Garth Davis's book, Protein, a Holographic. I'll say, plants have plenty of protein. Did you know that there's more grams of protein in 100 calories of broccoli than 100 calories of steak? And or I'll just say, well, you know what? I had my physical this year, and doctor says I'm doing great. I got plenty of protein. It's, I'm not a dietitian or a doctor, and it depends if the person wants to be argumentative or really know, but it just seems to be a very prevailing belief that plants don't have adequate protein. A lot of people don't even know that plants have any protein.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? That's really crazy. Yeah, and by the way, I'm guilty of this in the past myself, where I remember, so my first job out of college, I worked at Gold's Gym. And so I was following like the really stereotypical like personal trainer, bodybuilder diet. And I remember when I was counting my grams of protein, because if you're trying to be a bodybuilder, you have to eat 1 gram per pound, right? So it's a huge amount of protein. 1 gram of protein per pound of your body weight per day. That's what they thought then. And I remember I didn't even count the grams of protein from the plants because I just assumed it was so little. And I was working as a personal trainer, by the way. So if you think about that, think about how many people are getting nutrition advice from someone like I had been, who just don't realize that actually contributes any meaningful amount of protein to your diet. And that's where, if you want to, we can launch into like how much, all that stuff. I got some
because people think a lot of times that they're not gonna be able to build muscle on a plant exclusive diet.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, I've been eating this way for a long time. There's data looking at this too. There's a great study just published this year looking at people eating completely vegan diets supplemented with soy protein versus omnivorous diets supplemented with whey protein. And they showed the same strength and size outcomes. And this, by the way, one of the senior authors on this paper has been funded by dairy. Like, this is not like a bunch of vegans trying to prove their point. Like, this is just, by any account, it's, this is just objective. So anyway, so to kick it off with sedentary folks, or not even sedentary people, just people who are engaging in, quote, modest levels of physical activity. So the Food and Nutrition Board of the Institute of Medicine, a bunch of brilliant a bunch of brilliant scientists, they set the amount of protein, they set the RDA, right? The amount of protein required to meet the needs of 97.5% of healthy people who, like I said, are engaging in modest levels of activity. They set that. Do you know what the number is? I'm quizzing you here. Don't sweat it if you don't know it. Do you know what the RDA?
How many grams a day they need?
How many grams per kilogram?
I'm not good at math, but my guess is a person needs about 50 grams of protein a day is my guess, an adult. But
yeah, that's awesome. I think you're right on target. So when you break that down in terms of grams per kilogram of body weight, because bigger people would need more, smaller people would need less, it's 0.8. So the number is 0.8. But who really cares about the 0.8? Because the question is, are people getting the 0.8? And for that, we can look at the largest forward-looking study of nutrition in history. It's called EPIC, stands for European Prospective Investigation into Cancer Nutrition. So huge study, and a subset of it, they looked at 30,000 people, and they found that vegetarians, vegans, meat eaters, pescatarians, all of them exceeded that amount. All of them got more than the 0.8. So the vegans got 0.91. So you need 0.8, the vegans got 0.91. So just regular folks, these aren't even really healthy vegan. I mean, these are just like moderately healthy vegans, but it's not like the True North crew, this is like, so they're exceeding it without even trying, right? So that's for sedentary folks. We can kick it up to endurance next, unless do you have any thoughts or questions about that?
Well, I'm just wondering, are there consequences of getting too much protein for a person or an athlete? Are there negative consequences?
So that's a good question. A lot of it boils down to the source. So there's a fantastic paper, it was published in 2019. The journal is called Advances in Nutrition. And they basically found that, or not, I shouldn't say found that, there was a review. So they discussed And they said that when you say, are there consequences of getting too much? Well, oftentimes people will confound these short-term studies with these long-term studies. And in this particular paper, they said, if you get a lot of protein, it's great because you lose weight. And when you lose weight, a bunch of great things come with that. So they found short-term benefits, but these are metabolic benefits. It's like if you lose weight, it doesn't matter what you lose weight from. If you lose weight from malaria, your cholesterol drops, right? And so if your cholesterol drops, that might look good. So short term, it seems fine, but long term is a totally different situation. So I care about cholesterol only as much as how it affects risk of heart disease and premature death and cancer and things like that. So when you look at that in terms of the protein, that's where there's a fantastic meta-analysis. It was published by Harvard researchers. They looked at 7 communities in multiple countries. And they found that when you jack up protein and fat from animal sources, so a low carb diet where bacon, chicken wings, other sources of animal protein and fat, when those replaced carbs, it increased the risk of early death by 18%. So 18% increased risk of death when you basically overate animal protein. But when the sort of plant-based sources of protein and fat like nuts and seeds and avocado, when that came in replacement of some of these probably lower grade carbohydrates, then you had the opposite thing happen, an 18% decreased risk of early death. So the protein source really matters. And that's why I'm really hesitant to just say, too much protein is good or bad. I think the source certainly matters. And I'll also say that you and I both know that people who are sort of calorie restricting and also protein restricting, especially when it's animal sourced foods, that's a very effective life extension strategy. So I would say source matters. Yes, you can overdo it, but depending on, I would never tell someone that they need to eat less beans or vegetables because of their protein content. I think telling them, they should have less flaxseed, like that'd be crazy. So I would never say that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It just seems, David, that even people that understand that plants have protein seems to believe that somehow it's an inferior protein to animal protein or not a complete protein, something about not having all the amino acids. Because I remember there was a book, I think it was in the 70s, Frances Moore Lappé, The Diet for a New Planet, I believe it was, where she said, oh, yes, you can be vegetarian, but you have to very carefully combine, in every meal. She later retracted that was wrong, but the damage, I think, was done.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So the whole concept of protein complementing, like you have to have rice and beans in the same meal, that's been, like you said, that's been just retracted and debunked so many times. And the fact that it's still circulating is just, honestly, I think it's embarrassing. Like that just needs to die. And in terms of the quality of protein, so that's a topic that's near and dear to me. I published a paper with a couple of brilliant Australian researchers. It was published this year. The journal is called Current Nutrition Reports. And one of the ways people will try to explain that a plant-based diet has inferior protein quality is they use this scoring method called DIAS. It stands for Digestible Indispensable Amino Acid Score. It doesn't matter. It's DIAAS. And we just wrote this whole paper explaining how it's really not particularly applicable to plant-based diets. And in the Game Changers, we have some references we throw up on the screen about similarly, like you're going to get all the essential amino acids you need. You're going to get all the protein that you need. It doesn't matter if you're sedentary. It doesn't matter if you're a competitive athlete. Like you're going to get what you need. And the quality is just like, maybe it's like an American thing, right? Where we just say more is better. So no matter what, you just need more of everything. And it's kind of crazy because, I mean, you think there's like a middle path where you need enough, but not so much. And a plant-based diet's beautiful in providing that, just walking that balance in a way that serves us. But I wouldn't want to just start like pounding, amino acid supplements and protein shakes. It just wouldn't, would be unproductive, I think, for
There's a lot of athletes now that don't use them. Maybe they used to, but there's a lot now that are just like Robert Cheek that are just whole foods. It's all they're using, no supplements other than B12, of course.
Yeah, exactly. You can totally do it without it. So so I know Robert Cheek is he's more into building size rather than, a runner or a cyclist, but I want to just share a couple thoughts on the endurance piece, right? Because a lot of people will say, you know, I'm a cyclist, or I'm a swimmer, or I'm a runner, cross-country skier, I'm going to need way more protein, right? So maybe those people, and you see a lot of these supplements are marketed for endurance athletes. So I want to just share, you know, I mentioned the 0.8 before, right? So it's pretty well accepted that the amount for endurance athletes is more than the 0.8. So for them, it's 1.2 to 1.4. I see this in textbooks and scientific papers. The textbook I have here that I pulled this from is called Nutrition and Enhanced Sports Performance. So they say 1.2 to 1.4. But the question is, again, do people get that? Are people hitting that? Do they have to supplement to make that happen? Are omnivores the only ones who are getting it and vegans are falling short? So I want to share 2 studies. One published in the journal Nutrients in 2016, and they looked at vegetarians and omnivorous endurance athletes. The vegetarians fell right in that range. They got 1.2. So they got exactly what they needed. There's another paper published in the journal called BMC Nutrition, and they found vegans got 1.25. So this is published in 2019, but they got 1.25. So it's in that range. Vegans got it, vegetarians got it, meat eaters got it, all groups got it. So we could talk about the people for maximum size and strength, but really, you know, by virtue of running more miles, you get hungrier. So you eat more food, and then all of the food you're eating has protein. So even if your percentage of calories from protein stays consistent at like 12 to 15%, of calories coming from protein, just by eating more food, you increase the amount of protein you need, or that you eat. So we hit it easily. The endurance athletes hit it without even trying, without all the fancy stuff, you know, without extra emphasis on supplements and making sure they eat like blocks of tempeh and tofu, like just eat regular food. And for these athletes, they nail it.
Great. Why do you think the emphasis is on whey protein particularly? Like what's so great about whey?
So whey is higher in branched chain amino acids, specifically one called leucine. And these are the most, or leucine specifically, is considered the most important amino acid for anabolism or growth of muscle and other tissues. So it basically, this is what stimulates growth more than anything else, is this particular amino acid. Leucine has a whole bunch of it. Whey has a whole bunch of it. But there's research comparing rice protein against whey protein. I forgot, they were taking like almost 50 grams of protein a day. There's another study comparing pea protein versus whey protein, also around the same quantity. And both of these, it's several studies, and they're just showing similar gains when we just have a bit more of this protein. Like if you were to give someone 5 grams of whey protein versus 5 grams of pea protein, there's a difference. But once you sort of get the amount that's actually required to build size and strength and really put it on, it just doesn't make a difference what that source is. And we threw a paper in the movie about that in a guy named Rasmussen, published in 2016, just saying, yeah, like it doesn't matter. Like the source doesn't matter as much as just getting what you need. Once you hit the quantity, the source is just irrelevant. So yeah, I think whey is overhyped. And if anything, by virtue of having all that, those branched chain amino acids, that actually can be a problem in certain ways. There's a paper just recently published looking at the downsides of some of these other BCAAs, but basically you're switching on these aging pathways, something called mTOR. It accelerates the aging pathway, and it's pro-cancer. And so you can definitely overdo these. And that's, again, why something like whey, should be used with caution, if at all.
One of the things I've heard, I think might have been Dr. McDougall say, is that many great athletes prevail not because of their diet, but in spite of their diet.
Yeah, I agree. I really do. I really think that's spot on. And I can tell you there's a lot of athletes I work with. I'm going to give a particularly mean shout out to the hockey players who I love and work with. And I can't tell you the number of these athletes and others too, who will just get completely drunk the day before a game, like the night before a game. They're just completely wasted. And they come on the ice and they crush it. And that's amazing. And so it just makes you wonder if they were to really dial in their diets, what could they do? That's one thing. But then there's also that piece of just, if you practice that much and your genetics are that on point, I mean, I don't care how much I dial in my diet. I can't touch these people. Maybe you could.
No, I don't think I'm I'm the least athletic person I think you'll ever meet.
Oh, I don't know. I saw a video clip once of you. I don't remember what it was, but I think you were upside down doing something.
Okay, yoga. I can do yoga. I'm very flexible. I'm very limber, but I played pickleball, tore my rotator cuff. I just don't come from a family of athletes. You know, is it even possible to be protein deficient on any diet? I mean, I've heard some of the plant-based doctors say you can't be protein deficient unless you're calorie deficient. It's that rare.
Yeah, I mean, in the United States and other, I don't know what the word is, economically developed countries, you just don't see protein deficiency, like you said, in the absence of just massive undereating. You do see that in some developed countries where they just don't have the access to the sorts of foods that we do, but you just don't see it here. So, right, there's a condition called kwashiorkor where, you can see real nasty things happen from not getting enough protein. But yeah, so I've actually tried, by the way, I've deliberately tried to undereat the protein recommendations. I've used Chronometer. Are you familiar with Chronometer?
Yeah. It's an app. I have it on my phone. I don't use it much, but it's cool. It tells you everything you want to know.
Yeah, it's really cool and it's free and I like it. Yeah, it's a great app. And I've tracked my diet and done everything that I possibly could to undereat protein. And I just can't do it. Like, the only way I could do it is if I really limit the amount of vegetables I eat basically no beans and just load up on really just like fruit. And even then I could still even then I would have to eat like way too few calories. Cause even if I just eat the number of calories that I require in a day, even if I just did that completely through fruit, like I would still hit targets. So it's like really, really, really hard to do. Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like you just asked me.
No, but it's so interesting how most people in our country and in this world probably worry so much about deficiencies when most of the problems with these diseases are dietary excesses.
Totally. Absolutely. 100%.
You mentioned, I'm sorry, you mentioned fruit. And the reason I say is there's a well-known plant-based eater, Robbie Barbero, who's basically a fruitarian, follows an 80-10-10 diet. And I've seen his labs and they're stellar. He has to eat a lot more volume in order to get enough calories. But I'm thinking there's all kinds of variations of a plant-based or vegan diet. There's a junk food vegan diet, and there's a whole food plant-based, and then there's SOS free, and then there's various degrees of raw and cooked. And it seems like all of them, you're going to meet your protein needs regardless of what version of a plant-based diet somebody adopts.
Yep. I agree 100%. And people will try to throw in these wrenches. They'll say, well, you get enough protein for you, but what about me? I'm way older. And I heard that older people need extra protein to prevent, we call it sarcopenia, right? Muscle loss. So they'll make these higher recommendations for older people. But what's really interesting is the resistance training, like the weightlifting, matters so much more for those older folks than the amount of protein that they get in terms of protecting against muscle loss and bone loss, like osteoporosis or osteopenia. So yeah, I mean, the quantity of protein has gotten overhyped for sure. You can definitely get enough. The older folks can get it. The bodybuilders can easily get it. Actually, so that's a paper that I just wrote. I'm going to submit probably next month for peer review, where basically if you take these large populations, so I mentioned the EPIC people, but also there's the Adventist cohort in California. And if you just take what regular vegans are eating on these diets, not particularly supplemented with any protein powder, bar, or whatever, and if you just scale up their intakes to match the needs of someone trying to put on as much muscle as you possibly could, it hits the amount that they would require. It's about double the RDA. And yeah, they hit it. So it's weirdly overhyped given that we can easily get the amount we need. The one scenario, or there's a few, but the bigger scenario where it can be a challenge is if someone is trying to aggressively cut weight, think of a wrestler or a fighter who needs to aggressively cut weight. So their calories are coming down. But when your calories come down that fast, if you don't jack up protein, then that's the scenario where it could be tricky. But other than, I mean, unless you're one of these athletes, and even these athletes, I don't think need to aggressively cut that weight that fast, unless, I mean, if you maintain relatively lean throughout the season, which you can do, you can avoid all of that in the first place. But that's the one scenario. And I mean, most of us are just not trying to get spring break ready in 4 weeks. So, it's not really necessary.
Do you think that athletes worry about getting enough protein based on their sport? Like, for example, would a football player worry more because they have to be big versus, say, maybe a tennis player?
That's a really good question. And I would say, yeah, I would think that these athletes would be more concerned, that an endurance runner is probably going to pay less attention to it than a football player, right? I mean, the 1 rep max, how much they're lifting in the gym, seems to matter a whole lot more to a football player than a runner. So they're going to think, well, if I want that number to go up, then I need to eat more protein. But I forgot where it is. There's research looking at how much protein these athletes are actually getting. Now, remember, like we were talking about before, that the Atkins diet, if you overeat protein, if you just eat a huge amount of protein, you get real full. So then you don't have enough appetite to eat enough carbs. And for these athletes, they really need to eat a lot of carbs. So it can actually be a problem. And I wanted to just pull up real quick. There's research looking at male and female highly trained athletes, highly trained. Here's a paper published in 2018 from the journal called Medicina. And I'm going to quote from the study. It says almost half, so 49% of the athletes from the final sample reported lower measured intakes of carbohydrates, and 27% reported a higher consumption of proteins than what was recommended. So basically, you have people overeating protein and under-eating carbs for their performance. And there's more research looking at that in Division I soccer players, in professional and semi-professional athletes. They're saying another study published in 2019, the journal Nutrients, quote, says, professional and semi-professional athletes' dietary intakes met or exceeded recommendations during training and competition for protein and or fat, but not energy and carbohydrates. So basically, they're eating so much protein and fat, they're displacing the carbohydrates that they need to actually perform really well. And that's, it's ironic. Here they are thinking that the protein is going to fuel their performance more, but they're actually shooting themselves in the foot. And that's one of the reasons why one of the first things I do with a lot of athletes is just have them sort of rebalance those macros and chill out on the steak and the whey protein.
Don't they feel unwell eating that way? I mean, I've been vegan since I was 17, but I remember when I was 11, I went on a high protein diet. I think it was called not Atkins, it was Stillman or Scarsdale or something, where basically you just ate a lot of meat. And I felt very unwell. I was constipated. I had bad breath. I had no energy. You would think that they would feel a difference not eating carbs because you need that for energy.
Yeah. It's I guess different people are differently sensitive to the types of foods that they're eating. And some people, another thing is you get used to it, right? Like if I were to eat McDonald's today, I would be in pain. But I would bet anything that if for a month I just ate McDonald's every day, I would think I would get used to it. I think you'd acclimate to it. Not that my body wouldn't be suffering, but just that you sort of recalibrate. It's like if you are sleep deprived, you get like 4 hours a night. It's brutal at first. At a certain point, you get used to it. That doesn't mean your body doesn't still suffer, but I feel like that's probably what's happening. A lot of these people have probably been eating this way ever since they were kids. So there's nothing to compare it to. It's like when you go on a vacation, you come back to work and it hurts. They don't ever go on that vacation. They don't ever get that ability to reset.
Yeah. Well, when people eat a lot of protein from animal sources, they're really not just eating protein, they're eating fat. People there's no just protein that, I mean, maybe there is in these supplements, but protein comes with a lot of fat, a lot of saturated fat with it.
So it can, right? I mean, and usually it does, right? But I mean, if you think of like a grilled chicken breast or egg whites or something like that, I mean, you can circumvent that. But even still, that doesn't make it healthy, right? Just because you pull out I know that there was a demonization of fat a long time ago, and it's still, I mean, it's appropriate. I think saturated fat is brutal. And not even just from animal sources. I think, you'd have to pay me a lot to have coconut oil or palm oil or something like that. Even the cocoa we have is we have cacao powder because, anyway. Yeah, I feel like that fat is a problem, but the protein, for some reason, I think people don't realize the links between the higher animal protein, even when you tease apart the fat, and these risks of heart disease and certain types of cancer and premature death. It's strong. It's a strong link. And I'm happy that people are focusing on it more now, because otherwise it's just like, well, okay, then I'll have low fat cheese. Well, it doesn't really fix it. So.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the KON potato study, where they ate nothing but potatoes for a year, and then these people actually were athletes, and they still were able to do their athletics, and they had no nutritional deficiencies after a year eating only potatoes?
No, so there's a gentleman who I can't remember his name, but he just ate potatoes for like a month. I forgot.
I think, Chris Voigt, the head of the Washington Potato Commission.
Is that right? Yeah.
And then there was Andrew Spudfit Taylor, who ate nothing but potatoes for a whole year.
Yeah, he's the guy. Yeah, I was thinking of him. So, but yeah, I didn't know about. Wait, tell me the name of the study. It's called KON.
KON. Maybe you could Google it, because I think about how people think, well, if they don't eat protein, they're not going to be satiated. And I interviewed Dr. Barbara Rolls at Penn State, and she said when they've done studies, people couldn't ascertain that there was more protein. In other words, they didn't feel that they felt the protein was more satiating, but it really wasn't.
Wait, you're saying that people felt that protein was more satiating?
They believe that it is. They believe that without a lot of protein, they're going to feel hungry, but that was proven not to be true in her studies.
Oh, got it. Oh, so I'm not sure which study you're referring to, but it's possible. So there's research called something like the satiety index of foods, and they look at how full you feel after eating different foods. And I believe that a potato crushed every other food. I mean, just like off the charts, potato was the most satiating food per calorie, I believe. And they compared it to these high protein foods like, meat and dairy and stuff. So yeah, I'm not super surprised. I mean, protein is satiating, but that doesn't mean there are other mechanisms to get full also, right? I mean, you don't have to just get full off of protein. Like there's different receptors in the gut, and they respond to different things. So you and we use these stretch receptors, right? The baroreceptors to feel full. And so we just we get to eat way more food than they do, right? We get to eat loads of it, and they end up having smaller portions.
That's what's so cool about a plant-based diet. If you eat it without, oil and things like that, you get to eat a lot of food.
Yeah. Yeah. There's wonderful research. A dude named Kevin Hall just studied this. Did you hear about this? Like in the last?
I did, and I've been trying so hard to interview him. He once emailed me back, and I can't seem to get him now. He's so big, but I think I know what study you're going to be talking about.
Oh, cool. Yeah. He's fantastic. I love reading his work, and yeah, I mean, it confirms what you and I have experienced firsthand on both sides, where you're eating the high protein animal food and where you're eating the the plant-based meals. And yeah, it's incredible. I loved actually having them quantify that, because I remember back at True North, I would get like a plate of food and everyone would look at me like I was nuts, because it's just like a big mound of food. But I feel bad for people who can't eat that much food. I like eating. I like getting.
I know. I feel bad when I have to teach at these spas where everything is portion control and calorie control, because I starve, because, the serving of rice there is a half a cup. And in my world, a serving of rice is 2 to 3 cups, or as much as you want. And it's crazy that people believe that in order to lose weight or be healthy, they have to eat less food. Yeah. I mean, you have to have fewer calories, but you don't accomplish that by eating less food. Well, you can. You'll be very hungry.
Agreed. And by the way, I really like that you do all this. Correct me if I'm wrong. I remember last time, you do this with fruits, vegetables, and grains, but you don't even do it with the beans, right?
Right. I have such, and I know all the plant-based diet, not all of them, but a few of them think I'm going to drop dead because I don't eat beans or live long. But I've tried every legume, and I don't know if it's a true allergy. I just can't eat them. It's been probably 6 years now. And I get enough calories just from fruits, vegetables,
right,
whole grains, and I haven't added any fat to my diet. Again, people are like, I'm killing people.
That's so cool.
I get tested every year in my omega, the index that Dr.
It's amazing, right?
It's like 4.5, what it's supposed to be. If it was bad, then I would probably add some flaxseed or take a DHA supplement. But like, again, there's a chapter in the book, The Pleasure Trap, Looking for Health in All the Wrong Places. People focus on these deficiencies, when in fact the true problem is generally the excesses. And that's why I believe that there's no one size fits all in a plant-based diet. You can devise a healthy plant-based diet with varying amounts of fat, depending on your needs. But I don't know how to eat fat and not be fat. If somebody could teach me that, maybe I would do it, but never worked for me.
Well, I think your approach is working beautifully for you. I remember you sent me your blood labs and they were like gorgeous, like absolutely pristine. And it was so cool. And I agree with what you're saying. I mean, if your body doesn't respond well to beans, and I totally trust that you've tried every one and you've seen, and if it doesn't respond, then like, okay, that's fine. Like you said, your diet is so low in fat. So your omega-3 index was great. And by the way, that's also confirmed in the research too. There's where they compared 40% versus 20% of calories from fat. And this was an omnivorous diet. And the people who were eating less fat, and you're eating way less than that 20%.
And I think when I do chronometer, some days it's 7%, some days it's 18%, because, people don't realize, just like with protein, David, people think, oh, there's no protein in plants. People don't realize that
Right.
There's fat in food that isn't a nut, a seed, or oil. There is actually trace amounts of fat in fruit. There's fat in greens. There's oats are like 20% calories from fat when I have probably oats every day. So it's just like you can't design a diet that is protein deficient unless it's calorie deficient. You really can't design a fat deficient diet unless you're not eating enough calories.
And if you're eating the healthy stuff that you are too, right? Like if you, like, I think that's a big part of it, is that the fat sources that you're eating, like I know no one thinks of kale as a fat source, but it definitely has omega-3s. And I remember at True North, they had purslane, right? Which was, I think
I
that's
love purslane. Yeah.
it's good, right?
It's good. It's a weed, but it's delicious. And it's a really high source of those omega-3 fatty acids.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to convert so many more of the ones that you're eating into that long chain because you're eating such little fat, which is really, really cool. Whereas if you were eating a higher fat diet, you'd convert less of it. And that was the coolest thing I saw in your blood labs, was that your omega-3 index rocked. And I'm not at all surprised, because the group that ate less fat in that study I just mentioned, they converted enough omega-3, enough of that, the omega-3s that you're eating, the ALA, into the EPA and DHA, that it looked as if they were taking a supplement. It looked just like their levels were as good as if they were supplementing. And so, yeah, I think that that's such a cool thing, that you are getting the protein you need, including all the amino acids. You're getting the fat you need, including all the omega-3s, and the long chain ones too, because your body's making it. That's just so cool. I love that there are multiple ways to get to the same spot of health.
Do you find that when athletes transition to either a primarily plant-based or plant-exclusive diet, they go through the same changes, if you will, as regular people? Like, I don't know, maybe, there's a period where people are changing their diet where maybe they don't feel so good initially because they're used to eating more of this, or, you know what I mean? Like there's like almost a detox.
So that's a good question, right? Do you think so I think there's a few things that could cause people to not feel so great. So one would be if they're used to getting this paltry amount of fiber in their diet. And now all of a sudden, even just like a single bowl of chili is going to have so much more fiber than they used to, that, the same way it would be ridiculous if the most you've ever walked is a 5K, the idea of running a marathon is just insane, right? You have to work up to it. In the same way, your gut bacteria that process this fiber needs to have a chance to work up to it. And so one thing I see is people just, they'll have this GI distress pretty bad because they went from 0 to 60 way too fast. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I think a lot of people think, and you know this as well as anyone, that the understanding, the impression of what you eat on this diet is just like salad. And so they eat, like, without trying, they eat like 600 calories. They have no energy. They don't like the food they're eating. And so they're like, well, my energy dropped. There were pro football players who came to me after they did that. They're like, I lost 10 pounds in a week and I can't eat a plant-based diet. I'm like, what did you eat? And they're like, well, I mean, I had a side salad, like for my meal. I'm like, what are you like?
They don't understand calorie density. They need to eat more.
Exactly. They need to eat more. And sometimes, they'll get really full off of a bowl of fruit. But like, if you're, 250 pounds, like, you should probably add some nuts to that. You should probably add some oats to that. You should probably bump up, like you said, calorie density. It's like this scale that people absolutely, it's an easier time, I think, to manage that for weight loss. I think for weight gain, people don't realize, like, trail mix, like dried fruit, all these things that, they just don't even think about, but that's massively important. So I think that people will feel worse sometimes. Those are the two scenarios that I've seen really, is
Yeah.
they undereat calories or they overeat fiber way too fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think?
I think that those are both great points, because I wonder about these people that are on these keto diets, because they're very popular for diabetes now, and I'm thinking, how do they ever go to the bathroom?
um, yeah, there's this pilot study where they looked at these super low carb athletes in Australia, and they were actually usually in peer-reviewed study. They don't quote the athletes and say what they're actually, they don't take quotes from an athlete. Like, that doesn't happen in the scientific literature. But I remember reading one quote. They actually did do it in this, where the person was saying how they haven't gone to the bathroom in a long time. They have no gas at all eating that way, but they were looking at it as a plus that they barely go to the bathroom. And I don't know. I just don't see that as something I would want to do. I feel like it's probably a good thing to have to move your bowels on occasion.
Absolutely. So do we have to worry about protein in a plant-based diet for, say, children, or is this kind of diet safe for children and even infants?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely safe. Absolutely. There's the most recent position paper from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So anyone who's a dietitian has to come through this organization. And in their position on vegetarian diets, published in 2016, they said that vegetarian and vegan diets are healthful, appropriate for people at all ages of the life cycle, including children, including breastfeeding mothers, like everyone. And my family is a walking example of their position stand. You've met Lily and Cody a number of times, my 7 and 5-year-old, and ever since the day they were born, they were completely plant-based. So.
And your wife had plant-based pregnancies with both of them, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. I don't think in his entire life, Cody's also been SOS free his entire life, and Lily has been almost her entire life. So yeah, I mean, we take our B12 and a couple other things, but we're doing great.
That's incredible. When you are working with an athlete that came from either the standard American diet or definitely not a plant-based diet, I'm sure you don't go from, like you said, 0 to 60. You don't say, okay, well, eat this perfect SOS-free diet. Do you kind of transition them a little bit to, and maybe give them more of the processed things, like maybe they want the Beyond Burgers or things like that at first?
Yeah, so I don't usually transition pro athletes to SOS free diets. I usually don't do that. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but I mean, first of all, they're so far on the other end of the continuum that it would take a long time to work in that. But also, there are reasons why an ultra endurance runner would not want to skip out on salt. But I mean, for almost everyone else, it doesn't work that way. But yeah, I mean, the way I work with patients is the crowding out method, right? Where we just add stuff that they love, and then it just slowly starts to displace the other things. So if we look at their diet and let's say that there's some gaping hole that they have no vegetables at all, and then I ask them, are there any vegetable dishes that you do like? And they'll always just tell me the stuff that they hate first. And I'm like, I don't care what you hate. Like, they're like, but I hate cabbage. I'm like, well, I don't care, because I don't care what you hate. Like, I'm not gonna try to have you eat that stuff. They're like, well, I like creamed spinach. I'm like, okay, like, you and I know creamed spinach is not like the healthiest food in the world, but like, if it's a way for them to eat more vegetables, and just, it's gonna displace something that's probably worse than that. So we'll just throw creamed spinach in. And then they'll have more and more of like the 3 vegetables that they do like. And so it works that way. And then slowly you see these, I mean, you can obviously do like a New Year's resolution style, everything changes overnight, but I feel like that breaks people and they reset, go back to the way that they had been. So I like the idea of just slowly transitioning them, and it sticks. Just by crowding out. That's what you do too?
Yeah, well, definitely. Yeah. And I love your thing about saying, well, don't tell me what you don't want to eat. Tell me what you do want to eat.
Yeah, right. I mean, why? It doesn't, I think people think it has to be torturous to make virtuous dietary changes. Like, they're just so used to it being beaten into them that, you're going to have to get through the grind. They have to watch like YouTube motivational videos to like motivate themselves to drink the nasty shake in the morning. Like, it just doesn't have to be that way. Like, that's just bad marketing. So yeah, I think,
I wonder if athletes ever look at other athletes that have been very successful, maybe Olympic level athletes on a plant-based diet and aspire to that. I'm just curious how and when they decide to go plant-based. Because now we have so many people like Patrick Barbourian, the strongest man in the world, is vegan. Does that influence other bodybuilders, or they just feel like he's an outlier?
I think both. I think it depends on the person and on how they experience, how they interpret things that are new and different from what they do. You know, I think it speaks a lot to a person if when you see something out of the realm of your usual, do you feel threatened? Are you inspired? Are you curious? I mean, I love when curiosity is the knee-jerk reaction to something different. But yeah, I mean, I think you see both. You see a lot of guys getting tormented in the locker room over the type of diet that they're eating. Or whatever it is, you know, whether it's plant-based or keto or what, I mean, people are just, they're going to feel threatened by whatever's different. But when these athletes perform better eating that way, I think that's when the ribbing starts to, you know, metamorphose into something more inquisitive.
Yeah, that would be cool if there was one pro sports team where like everyone was plant-based and if they could crush all, you know, I don't know whether it was NBA or NFL, if that world team or baseball, you know, all like they had a team of just plant-based and then we'd really have a study, wouldn't we?
That would be really cool. Can you Google the Forest Green Rovers? You don't have to do it right now. I think it's Forest Green Rovers, but just Google it and I think you'll see a close version of that. And then also the Tennessee Titans, their defensive line was largely plant-based for a while. I think they still are. I'm not sure, but yeah, I mean, there are teams that are getting close to that. Yeah.
I just worry that when somebody really famous, whether it's an athlete or an actor, and I see this a lot of times, they get promoted for being plant-based and then they stop being plant-based because it didn't work. And it's like, why? It's like, don't even, you know, I wish they didn't do that.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And the thing is, when they say it doesn't work, like it didn't work for them, like somehow their body rejects this. And then they'll say, well, everyone's body's different. And I just like, yes, everyone's body's different. That's true, but it's not like, I think people take that to mean more than it should. Like everyone's body's different, but that doesn't mean that some people should smoke cigarettes for health and some people shouldn't, right? Like, yes, our bodies are different, but no one adapts well to like nitrosamines in processed red meat. There's no one who's like, find a study where someone says that's good for their health. Like at best they can find no difference because of some methodological and statistical wizardry. But like it's all it means to me is just that they didn't, they and I don't blame them. It's a big change to make. If you're going to change anything, it's a big change, but like you take your time and you troubleshoot and you work your way through it. If you lift weights and you don't get bigger from it, you don't say, well, lifting weights doesn't work for my body. I don't actually put on muscle from lifting weights. Maybe, I mean, probably not, because you'd be the only person ever where that would ever happen. But like, maybe if you lift more weights or do it more often, or maybe you lift it, you know, maybe you do less, maybe you're overtraining, or maybe you should eat a little bit more while you're lifting weights. So I feel like, yeah, there's that whole really public, like it didn't work for me, so I throw in the towel. But like,
there's whole YouTube channels, anti-vegan, devoted to how dangerous it is. It's
I believe it. All it does, it just speaks to me of like, that person just didn't try. Like you didn't do your homework. Like it's like you flunked out of school and you're publicizing that you flunked out of school. Like it's okay to flunk out of school, but like, why do you
like I went to AA and not drinking didn't work for me.
Right? Like, why do that? Why not just?
I don't know. Doug Lyle might know. Maybe it's a status thing or something like that. You know, I'm thinking like in the plant-based community, like one of the things people try to do is educate their doctors that might not be aware of a plant-based diet because they didn't get much nutritional training in medical school. I wonder how much would help at the level of coaches, because I'm sure coaches have influence on what the team eats and what recommends. And, you know, I'm wondering, are there any coaches of major athletics that understand a plant-based diet and why it might be beneficial?
Yes, there are, and there need to be more. But yes, I agree with you very much that matters a lot. That the knowledge and awareness of the physician, you know, team physician, coach, all of that plays into it massively. To just sort of change that culture really goes a long way, and that's why I'm happy. You know, even if I'm not personally going to start pounding these protein supplements. I'm thrilled that there are companies like Orgain that are making them, because now they can get those into the strength and conditioning rooms, the training rooms, and so people can start to have that and start to realize that can, it's a step. It's all sort of a progression. And if they can realize that whey isn't necessary, and but maybe they're only willing to make the jump to rice protein, okay, fine. And then like, well, what happens if you just had like some I don't know, soy milk or something, and you sort of work your way through. But yeah, I think I'm optimistic of the direction that the world of athletics is moving in this way, because they're going to do whatever they can to gain a little edge on performance.
And you think of some of the things that athlete like Gatorade, that's gross. I mean, it's blue. You're not supposed to eat things that are blue. I mean, blueberries maybe. But
Well, I think that was made for like, right. It was made for athletes, right? Was it Florida Gators? But like then, I mean, if an athlete, if a football player is playing in the middle of their game and they need this stuff, it's so different than like you see people just stop off at a 7-Eleven and pick up a Gatorade, and you're like, are you in the middle of like an extensive soccer game? Like what exactly are you fueling right now? But yeah, I agree. There's some good messaging on there where even though it's just like sugar and salts and artificial flavors or whatever, it just seems like, well, athletes have this, so I should too. And that goes back to the salt thing before, right? Where if Scott Jurek needs salt while he's running crazy distances, does that really mean that I need that when I'm sitting in my office? Like, probably not.
I wish somebody would make healthier versions of the gels and all those products, which are just basically crap.
Well, some of them are like, it's not, I still wouldn't want to drink it unless I was competing or training or in whatever way. But like, for example, Tailwind is a version of Gatorade that at least is, one step in the right direction. Still completely ridiculous unless you're in the middle of training or competing. But yeah, they're moving there. You can also do it using whole foods, but it takes more effort. Like grapes have a really good mix of the right sugars of fructose and glucose in a way that's actually can be really helpful. So you could make your own version of this with like celery juice and grape juice and things like that. But you can't buy that in a store. So.
Well, I bet you somebody will fill that niche at some point, because it's I think people would buy it. You mentioned some papers you were writing or submitting. Where can people find out more about your work? Like if we Googled these, because I think that would be interesting to read.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know where people could find more of my work.
Maybe a book you'll be writing.
Yeah, maybe that. I would definitely check out, I wrote up some summaries of some recent papers on the Game Changers Institute website. There's also some information on the gamechangersmovie.com. So, yeah, I deliberately came off of social media. So they probably wouldn't be able to reach out, but.
And we learned before we logged on that David Goldman is a common name.
Very, very, very common name. Very common name, for sure. I would point out one paper though, if someone wanted to take a look on, I co-authored a paper with Neil Barnard and a few other people. It's called PlantBased Diets for Cardiovascular Safety and Performance in Endurance Sports. So I'm going to start writing some stuff on building more muscle rather than just the endurance, because I find that the strength sport piece more interesting. But that's, if someone was interested in learning more about plant-based diets and how they apply to endurance sports and heart health, that's a good paper. It's published in Nutrients in 2019. I think it's pretty readable.
Maybe you could give us the link to it, because there are people that really like to read these things.
Cool. Yeah, I'm happy to. And it really is, like, I think it's relatively accessible for one of these kinds of papers, and to share it with like we were just talking about, sharing it with your doctor if they're like, you can't eat this way and perform well, or I think these are the sorts of things that are worth circulating. So I'll send you the link to that.
That's great. We'll put it in the show notes. Well, I should have asked you this at the beginning, and I might have asked you at one point, but in case you're new to some of the viewers, when did you first adopt a plant-based diet and why?
That is a good question. And by the way, I just emailed you the link to the paper. So I became vegetarian really, really, really early in my life. I was in like elementary school. And I did that all the way through, I think I was 20 years old. When I was 20 years old, I started eating meat because I thought I had to. I didn't want to eat meat, but I thought I had to for performance. I thought I had to put on strength and size. So when I was 20 until I was 27, I ate tons of meat. I ate a paleo diet before it was called paleo. I tried the Atkins and the keto and all that stuff. So from 20 to 27, I was eating that way. When I turned 27, I had already gone through grad school. I had learned as much as I needed to know to understand that I just didn't have to eat that way for the outcomes that I cared about. So it's been 10 years now. I'm 37. So for the last 10 years, I've been eating an entirely plant-based diet.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's so great catching up with you. I wish you could come back to True North. You were just such a great lecturer. You probably still are, but I just really enjoyed your talks there.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Are you going there each?
I haven't been there in 3 years, but if I knew you were there, I would come just to hear you because you were.
Let's sync up. Let's sync up. Maybe we can go for. They have the holiday extravaganza.
He canceled that 3 years ago, but we could still show up and not tell anybody.
No.
Because too many people got interested in the fasting aspect, and we were crowding out the fasters with the feeders. So.
Oh, got it. Oh, but it was such a celebration.
Oh, man, that was the funnest. I remember, that was so fun.
Yeah, it
Good
was.
Times. All right. Well, it's so great. Yeah, it was so great catching up with you. Anytime you want to come back, let me know.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, my pleasure. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow for another great show.